All right, hello everyone. Welcome back for another conversation with the Free Will Project. I am Chet, and I am here today with Lova, my new friend. We haven't talked too much, but I'm excited about having this conversation. I think you're going to bring some interesting things that maybe we haven't talked about on this channel before. So to get started, can we know a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
All right, so my name is Lidén. I'm from Sweden. My background is I've been mainly working with film and um, and human rights issues for the better part of my adult life. I have two kids, and I'm 40. Yeah,
Awesome.
and I think a lot about uh, these questions, free will and other philosophical issues.
Awesome. Can I ask, I'm just curious, what kind of like human rights work?
Well, the main project, I'm always been involved in different kinds of activism, environmental activism, activism for immigration issues, and equality issues. But my main big project has been to be part of creating a workers' cooperative um, in Sweden, where we are. I'm not working with that anymore, but we were creating jobs basically for immigrant families to create an alternative path to stay in the country for people who had trouble to get asylum in Sweden. Uh, that there's an alternative path where you can get a work permit.
That's
Okay,
amazing.
seems like my are you hearing me fine?
Yeah, yeah, you
Okay,
sound
my
good on this
internet
end.
connection is a little bit unstable. Okay, so yeah, basically the idea is to you intercept families that are in a very difficult situation and who you are predicting is going to get evicted from the country. Evicted is not the right word here, right?
Um,
Yeah.
Deported?
Huh?
Deported, maybe?
Deported. Yeah,
Evicted
that's right.
makes
That's right.
sense.
Families that you know are going to get deported. You know, you basically know they're going to get a negative response, but but their situation is bad enough that they risk to go into hiding or something like that, and you create a job for them in good enough time that you can prepare a work permit application as a response to the negative to the deportation notice, and then you kind of build a legal situation for that family in Sweden that way. So that was like the practical idea, and it was quite successful. So it's been going now for 15 years or so.
That sounds like brilliant work. I love that.
Yeah.
There's so many layers to it because I love the idea of worker co-ops.
Mm,
People having more autonomy over their work life. And worker co-ops seem to treat people very well. And then on top of that, you're helping, keep people in a difficult situation, keep them in a better situation. I don't know. That's lovely. There's so many layers of good stuff there.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's been very rewarding to work with that. I would say the biggest backside of it is that you can't help the people who are really in a bad spot, who are traumatized or you know incapable of working at full capacity. You can't help those. That's a kind of downside of this. But then there's other organizations that can help those people, hopefully. So,
right. Yeah, I'm definitely sympathetic to that as well.
mm.
Um, but yeah, that sounds like a brilliant project. And you said you have some experience in film as well?
Yes, I've been working as a freelancer with film and graphic design
Awesome.
and some different, yeah.
Yeah, early on in college, my associate's degree was in media production, but I never really pursued that as far as like a career or anything. And you can see how much editing skill I have now, which is like practically none.
Hmm.
Everything that I once knew has like become outdated, and I don't hardly recognize the systems people use now. So that's unfortunate,
Yeah.
but yeah, film is, video is so much more relevant today than I thought it would have been back then. This was, before YouTube and all that.
Mm.
And yeah, there's so many people doing good work in film. Um, Let me ask about your specific background with the question of like free will and free will skepticism. What got you inspired to start thinking about, behavior and life in those terms?
Yes, I think the starting point really was meditation and spirituality for me, and how that changed my relationship to myself and my relationship to my conscious experience, moment to moment experience, and the way I just looked at the way consciousness works. And then when I got into touch with the philosophical question of free will, um, people like Sam Harris, or yeah, all these people who are talking, laying out the kind of argument for free will, it felt like a description of what I already believed. Um, like I already arrived at something, at this kind of understanding of myself, but I didn't. It wasn't an intellectual understanding. It wasn't understanding in a form of argument. So it's more like it was kind of, I was there, and then it was kind of crystallized for me through these discussions. So I can't really pinpoint a moment of being convinced that there is no free will, because I never really had, uh, I never really had a belief in free will, uh, like expressed belief in free will.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I find it so fascinating how for some reason meditation is a valuable tool for a lot of people for understanding free will skepticism. And
Mm,
I haven't quite put together why that is, but it's very fascinating that that's a common theme among people uh that yeah, something about like sitting with yourself and paying attention to your thoughts and paying attention to your environment and just what it's like to be and just to
mm,
be a being. uh Something about that, like I don't know, it like peels away some of the superficial narratives we have about ourselves and like how we go through the world and why we go through the world the way we do. And I don't know,
mm.
there's I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, like why meditation plays a role in understanding free will skepticism.
Yeah, I think there is a kind of a two-stage process, where already the first stage is very important here, because when you start working with mindfulness or mindfulness meditation, uh, you are starting with the exercise of just paying close attention to your experience, and this kind of uh, gives you, the more you practice, you start being more good at really feeling the exact components of your experience. Like, things stop being kind of mushed together as one big flow of experience, and you can see, okay, that's a thought. That's how it feels to have that thought. That is, that's the pain. Okay, but these are the exact components of that pain. That's the energy pattern going along the left side of your spine, and so okay, I'm not just having pain in my back. I'm having all these little exact experiences that composes that pain, and if you're exact enough about the experience, it stops feeling like pain, right? It starts feeling like different, all just a bunch of different energy patterns that you can be aware of. And when the same happens with thoughts, it becomes quite clear that that what is experiencing the thought is not the same as the thought itself, and this creates a situation where you're not necessarily identified with your thoughts or emotions. And if you're not identified with your thoughts and emotions, you're not responsible for them. You're not experientially feeling responsible for them. You're not feeling like a thinker just because there are thoughts in your mind.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this quite naturally leads to free will skepticism. And then I would say the next step up is experiences of what's called non-duality, which have a bunch of different schools and descriptions, but it's basically when the feeling of self drops away, and we kind of feel one way to say it is that the world is in you. You are not in the world is in you. So it's like, yeah, but it's what the Buddhists refer to as the self-illusion dropping away, and there's a bunch of other ways to speak about this, but that I would say that's the kind of the nail in the coffin for free will. In terms of meditation, like there's no you that could possibly possess this ability anyways. So you know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's an interesting like adjacent conversation to the free will discussion is
Mm,
the notion of the self as an illusion.
mm,
And I I'm not keeping up a meditation practice at the moment. I've just fallen out of the habit. But there's been a couple of periods in my life where I've actually kept up with it pretty well. And that is something that definitely definitely falls out of it is you really do start to tease apart these different like aspects of what used to seem like a singular uh, I don't know, personality or something like that. Like
mm,
you really can tell the difference between what it is just to be a being and also like what it is to be a being with these thoughts like running through your head all the time. And the fact that like struggle as you may and you can definitely improve, but like at least in my experience, I never really got control over my thoughts. I learned how to kind of watch them pass by,
mm,
and I learned how to like whenever I get stuck on one to kind of like let it go. But
mm,
but to me, it was always just fascinating how like when you do uh, at least get like somewhat deep into meditation, like your thoughts become more of like a TV show. They become like removed from you,
mm,
and yeah, you're able to tease apart like I don't know the thing that's like watching the thoughts. I don't know how to
mm.
describe it. You did a much better job, I think.
I mean, did we disappear? No, we're
I
yeah,
can still
sorry, I'm
see you.
getting lag. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I would say in the beginning it's definitely it can feel like it's thoughts all the way down, because your efforts to your efforts to drop back and watch the thoughts, like the fact that you're making an effort means that you're still thinking. So
Right.
it's a thought that you're caught in the thought of making that effort. Then you have to drop back another layer and observe that thought, and it takes a while to get out of that kind of um, phase where you're trying,
Hmm.
because meditation isn't about trying really. And it's but it's like you need to walk the path to get out of it in some sense.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, do you have any particular personalities or inspirations of people that have influenced your sort of development of these views, whether it be like with free will or meditation or spirituality or any of that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how much time we have for all this, but my personal journey started with a kind of homegrown shamanist practice where I
Okay.
was where I was singing. by myself as a means to handle a very difficult situation in my life when I was homeless as a young man. But then I had well, I was inspired by a lot of nonsense actually in the beginning. Things like what's it called? That fake anthropologist who made these Don Juan books about Castaneda, right?
Yeah, Carlos
Carlos
Castaneda.
Castaneda, and that was very inspiring for me, even though I don't believe in any of it now.
Right.
But there's a journey that you can walk a journey through nonsense and still get somewhere, and I would say that's how I started on the whole. The sort of experiential insight was in that context, actually, the first ones, and then I got in touch with Vipassana meditation, mindfulness, and people like Sam Harris, who talks a lot about these things, and you know, yeah.
His
So Dzogchen teachings and things like that.
his interview on the I don't know if you listen to the psychology podcast, but with Scott Barry Kaufman. But Sam's interview on there was really fascinating. I mean, they kind of dug in and went back and forth about free will because they disagree on that issue. But Sam also went like deep into his biography and just like his own experiences on that stuff. And
Mm.
I didn't know like half of the stuff he was talking about.
Right.
He's had a lot of really fascinating experiences that I think would affect the way he's perceived if more people like were thinking
Mm.
about him in that context.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people just think of him as like I don't know, annoying or arrogant or something like that. And I don't know, like I certainly disagree with him on plenty of things, but
Mm.
there's also I think he also has a lot of interesting experiences that are worth hearing about.
Mm.
So yeah, he's kind of an interesting character.
Yeah. Yes.
um
Absolutely.
s- so I was
I
gonna
would say also psychedelics had some part of it, but it's
yeah,
not where I started. It's more like I've had those experiences later on, and they've kind of deepened and uh, yeah, done something for this understanding to develop also. But I
yeah,
didn't start out with it.
I think that's interesting as well. That seems to play a role for a lot of people in I don't know, some sort of process of questioning like the self and what identity is and
Mm.
uh, yeah. So I don't know. I really hope there's been some efforts to you know get those out of the controlled substance classifications in the U.S. and bring them more into society where like responsible adults can experience those things and appreciate them, and
Yeah.
I'm definitely very supportive of that. I think uh, I think when done with care, I think there's a lot of value that people could gain from that.
Mm.
Especially for some reason, especially in my culture, I
Yeah.
feel like we're not a very introspective culture. I don't know how to explain it, but we tend to be very fixated on superficial things,
Mm.
and yeah, I don't know. Maybe a psilocybin trip would affect that.
Yeah. I definitely recommend it.
um, what do you have a particular like specific position with regard to free will or free will skepticism, or do you have I don't know philosophical labels you point to or anything like that?
I mean, yeah, I would call myself a hard incompatibilist,
Mhm.
where the incompatibilism is with any rational description of the world, like not referring to determinism, but referring to making sense in general. I think free will is incompatible with logic. I just think it's incoherent. No matter how you try to describe the world, it just doesn't work.
That's a
So that's my
fascinating
position. Yeah.
that's a fascinating description. It's
Mm.
just like because a lot of people when they talk about hard incompatibilism, they very specifically jump to determinism or indeterminism, and what you said there was much more broad. It's just like with
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Which
This is kind of a theme that I wanted to bring up. Is like when you have a journey that makes you reach some kind of insight, like free will skepticism, that you shouldn't mistake the journey for the argument in hindsight. So if you reach a free will skeptic position uh, through the assumption of determinism, like you realize free will doesn't make sense on the back of considering determinism. You shouldn't make the mistake in hindsight to think that it is the determinism that makes it not make sense. It's actually, I mean, and this is something people talk about all the time, how free will doesn't make sense under indeterminism either. It doesn't make any difference really, because a random choice isn't more free than a determined choice really. So it's but you can get there one way and then kind of realize, okay, I needed to walk this path to understand it, but the path isn't the logic really behind the position in the end. And I
yeah,
think that's how I refer to determinism. Like, yeah, you get to free will skepticism by thinking about determinism for sure, but determinism doesn't matter for free will being nonsensical, really.
yeah, definitely. I was talking with we both know Roy Becker, and he had a post the other day on Facebook about kind of about the same subject.
Mm,
Like why are people so attached to determinism
mm,
specifically? And that was kind of my answer, because personally that's also how I got to free will skepticism, was
mm,
thinking about the world deterministically and realizing there's a contradiction with these things. And I have no reason to believe that free will was the side of the argument that had like more, evidential weight. It was like the determinism was the side of the argument that seemed to correspond with all the evidence. And when I really asked myself about my direct experience, it
mm,
actually corresponded with that as well. Even though I had been trained, growing up to kind of think of myself as like a sort of libertarian agent in the world.
mm,
Um, the more I thought about it, and also, meditation and other experiences really like caused me to question that direct experience. Like, does that really make sense?
mm,
And so, yeah, eventually, uh, in encountering the contradiction between free will and determinism, I decided that determinism makes sense and to chuck free will. Uh, but yeah, along that process, you don't necessarily go back and look at like all the other paths that could also get you to that same position.
mm,
Um, if you had started out, grasping onto a purely indeterministic uh, narrative about the universe, which I don't know exactly what that would look like, but if that was your narrative, you could arrive at the same spot, chucking
mm.
free will.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think you're very right that like people associate like the journey and the sort of logic, they tie them together, and they are you can decouple those things, and they can be
Mm,
two separate concepts.
yeah.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Let's see what else. I'm curious if the subject affects your politics. You were talking about like worker co-ops, and in my mind, that's a bit of a political subject. It definitely like aligns with my political assumptions about the world, but I guess it's not necessarily political. Like, I guess that anyone could like worker co-ops.
Mm.
Uh, but uh, does free will or lack thereof like interact with your conceptions of like how people should be arranged, like, you know, socially or politically?
Not really. And but I do think that it illuminates some. If you become a free will skeptic, you are going to uh, have an easier time looking rationally at moral questions and socio-political questions and questions of responsibility and what makes sense. But I don't think it actually makes a moral difference if we have free will or not. So that's my position. And it's a little bit the same as what we talked about before with getting somewhere through something. Like if you lose your belief in free will, it becomes quite clear that vengeance makes no sense, right?
Right.
Or that you shouldn't assign excessive amounts of responsibility to someone just because they're the one who messed up. Piling up insurmountable amount of tasks on someone who can't complete them doesn't make any sense, just because they're the one who messed up, right?
Right.
Which is the kind of norm we have. We have this kind of norm where if you messed up, it's up to you to fix it. And that makes sense up to a point. It makes sense up to the point where you can fix it. It stops making sense if you can't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, this is very intuitive. Like, we don't expect a rapist to console the victim, right?
Right.
This is very intuitive to us. It's like immediately clear that it's the wrong person to take responsibility for the harm he caused. But if you're behind on your bills and your debt is piling up, and you come to a point where it's impossible for you to fix that, we are still kind of saying it's still up to you whether you can't or not, you know. But really, it's just like the criminal who's the wrong person to fix that. You can become the wrong person to fix your own economic situation if it becomes too severe, right?
Yeah.
And then we kind of help, but we maintain this pressure of guilt on you, which is unnecessary suffering for you. And these kind of things, all these kind of things, I feel like, okay, if you believe in free will, you're gonna have more emotional baggage to help you be irrational about this, or to kind of go around feeling like people deserve what they get or whatever. But they don't actually make more sense with free will, like vengeance and vindictive justice and things like that. They don't, like, if you're some kind of consequentialist where what's good is about the good things are things that have good consequences and vice versa, you have the same predicted consequences with or without free will. For example, if you punish a criminal, the predicted consequences of that punishment are exactly the same if the criminal had free will or not. So I don't see free will being like a real variable under most ethical systems, to really be like a proper argument that would work philosophically for punishing that person in a way that isn't motivated by good consequences. You're still gonna have to argue that it has deterrence effects, or it's a time to rehabilitate or make that one person a better person, or you're gonna protect people from being victims or whatever, all these good things that you can point to motivate the punishment. You're still gonna need them if you believe in free will. But I do think if you drop your belief in free will, this is gonna become very clear to you very easily. So
Yeah.
that's how Yeah, but I think that sometimes I hear free will skeptics talk about this as if there is a real moral consequence of having free will or not. And I actually don't think so. I don't think there's any good action that becomes bad or vice versa only based on this change. I actually don't think you can make that argument about anything.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. And at the same time, I think I fall into that habit sometimes
Mm,
of not separating those issues.
mm,
Um, Even though I know like consciously that makes sense, that you know, you can whether you believe in like one of the subjects I bring up sometimes is like spanking children.
mm,
We have a big problem in this country with people spanking their children,
right.
and all the psychological evidence that I'm aware of says don't do this. Like you're not helping your children like develop, you know, to
Mm,
be a good moral adult, you know, that can move through the world maturely.
mm,
You're like stunting that process. And so it doesn't really matter if like the child has free will or not, like
mm,
the consequences are the same. uh,
yeah.
but at the same time, I think, yeah, I think it does help if people kind of internalize that lesson
Mm,
of free will skepticism. I think it probably makes them less likely to engage in you know, punitive or abusive behavior. But they
mm,
really are two different, like two separate issues.
yes.
They just kind of run parallel. And yeah, I fall into the temptation to turn them into the same thing, but
Mm,
it's a very good observation that they're not.
yes. I had this argument with Trick on in a Facebook group, Trick Slatery, and he
Yeah,
said his comment on this was basically that um, that any adherent, if you want to be a retributivist, where you punish for punishment's sake, free will is a necessary component of that attitude. And it seems I tried to get to the bottom of how it's necessary, because for me it seems like if it doesn't do any work, then it can't be a necessary component if it doesn't do any work. It can be the case that retributivism is impossible to argue for. It doesn't have any necessary components because it's just nonsense all the way down. And if something's complete nonsense, no matter what you put in, it's hard to argue that some components are necessary or not necessary. But I can agree with him that it's intuitively necessary. It's probably intuitively necessary that you have this notion of true guilt or whatever to be able to maintain a retributivist attitude towards punishment or whatever. So yeah, I think it's emotionally and intuitively necessary components, but I don't think it does. I don't think you can put it in an argument for retributivism and have it do work.
yeah. Is it actually like mathematically necessary?
Yeah, I mean, but the problem here is we don't have an argument for
Yeah,
retributive practices. We kind of just jump directly from it's it's your fault to you deserve punishment. Like we don't have it's kind of a leap.
it's like all intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So basically I feel like but the reason I think this is quite important to be aware of is that because not everyone can stop believing in free will. I think there are a lot of people for whom this is completely impossible. They're not open to ever understanding the possibility of not having free will because their experience is so locked into that kind of that's how they motivate themselves, is through self-identified sense of agency and control. And I think if we're going to argue politically and socially for a more sensible version of justice and treating children and treating each other, we can't have that requirement. You have to give up free will to. We have to show that these arguments stand on their own. And I think a lot of the time, it's not going to be the free will argument that is the path to these changes.
That's fascinating.
Therefore, it's very important for us who are working for this to not kind of hook them up to our free will skepticism when we argue for them.
To not have that doing too much work or having too much ride on that.
It's easy to give the impression that it's because there is no free will that your retributivism doesn't make sense. And then it becomes easy to dismiss. As long as I believe in free will, I can keep my vengeful and
I can keep hitting my kids.
yes. I think it's important to kind of not fall into that, because the fact is that a lot of people are not going to stop believing in free will, I think.
I think that makes a lot of practical sense. I wonder if it's true that free will skepticism's like just completely inaccessible to some people, or why that would be true. But I see practically that that's probably the case, that you're not going to win everyone over to some specific position. And it makes more sense to me to kind of have a system of positions, or like kind of like an ecology of positions, that like some are going to make sense to more people and others are going to make sense to other types. And you could use that like system of ideas to kind of pull people in a better direction, rather than having everything ride on like one particular idea. That it makes sense to me that any single idea is probably not going to do all the work. That seems kind of magical in my mind, if that were to be true.
Yeah.
But yeah, can I ask kind of less practically, why do you think it is that that free will skepticism may not be accessible to someone? As you mentioned, like people's like kind of internalized systems of motivation. Is it mostly just kind of the difficulty of changing your mind about things like that? Like some people are probably not up for the task.
Yes, I think there are. I think you shouldn't underestimate how hooked up, like the sense of meaning and purpose for a lot of people, how hooked up on free will it is. And I think that, yeah, I think it's for a lot of people, it's simply emotionally inaccessible to ever give up free will, just based on the personal feelings that they have, or maybe they can give it up as an intellectual exercise, but not as a way of being in the world, you know. So, and those people you have to still be able to have rational conversations about everything else with. So yeah, I think it's a tall order to kind of get it into the general population, at least in the short term. I think we have enough to do with just making people drop out of religious beliefs to begin with, and free will is kind of a larger step for a lot of people, I think, than atheism.
So I want to ask a question about that. Do you feel similarly about religious beliefs? Like it may be impractical for some people to challenge like their whole religious belief system, or do you think that's it seemed like you kind of ranked those things a little bit, whereas like free will would be a greater challenge.
Yes, or maybe it's not a greater challenge for everyone. Maybe for some people it's the other way around, where they can give up free will in a religious worldview and kind of see God as the deterministic
Right.
factor. That
That
God is,
certainly exists.
that's not uncommon actually. So I wouldn't rank them one above the other. I would just say that um, when it comes to making the world a better place, if there are, you should be aware of when is the time and place for what argument. And I think free will skepsis is, it is a political and moral tool to use when it's kind of, when people are open to use that as to eliminate these questions. But as I said, I don't think it's a real variable for at least for consequentialist moral systems. I don't see free will being a real variable. So you don't need it. You don't need to use it. And so it's all a matter of what's important and what's the right strategy, you know. But yeah, I think when it comes to religions, there's this difficult need. There's one need to be honest about how nonsensical they are, and on the other hand, there's the need for reformation for all the people who are not ready to abandon religious beliefs, but they still need to get up to date with secular moral standards and things. So religions needs to, there needs to be reform, and religions needs to be kind of secularized without being forced to acknowledge that it's nonsensical. That's a difficult thing, I believe, because as an atheist, it's you don't want to go around and lie about the fact that you see it as nonsense, but at the same time, you want to help people reform their religions. And it's super difficult because a lot of the time the reformation is going to be even more nonsensical, right? It's going to be, it's a, you have the nonsense. I hope I don't offend too many people by saying that it's nonsense, but let's say you have this belief.
I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, you have this belief in that you get from your scripture, which is, and let's say it's unfounded, and then you're gonna reform it. You have to kind of misread the scripture. You have to stop reading the scripture as it's written, and the only reason to do that is to kind of make it more modern or better. So you have this nonsensical exercise on top of the original nonsense, and it's really hard to participate in that process as an atheist, I think.
I think
Because you're gonna react negatively to the, you know, to the, like a dishonest relationship to the scripture. You're gonna have a hard time to not point that out, like, why are you picking and choosing here?
I think so I have a couple thoughts. This is a fascinating fascinating road to go down. So I've been listening to, it's a YouTube channel. I think it's called Truth Hurts. But it's a guy that was a Jehovah's Witness up until last year. I think I think it's useful to use belief systems like Jehovah's Witnesses because especially in the U.S. People are somewhat familiar with it, and they view it as like adjacent to Christianity, but they also they're also able to be like, oh yeah, of course that's nonsense, like you know what I mean? So it's like this interesting journey watching this person uh, kind of come to a position of skepticism about his upbringing in the Jehovah's Witness organization,
Mhm.
and he started looking at some of their apologetics about things like the Great Flood, you know, and then he was like looking at the scientific research alongside of it, and he's realizing that like these explanations that are supposed to justify my beliefs don't make sense, you know. And he does come to a point where he has to like leave this organization, and it's even though he's very good spirited about it on his YouTube channel, and he's definitely like a very brave individual, and just seems like just a good person, a genuinely good person. Um, Announcing that he had doubts about those things and that he no longer believed those things, and in fact he was going to try to help other people understand what the truth was, basically like saying he was going to be honest about what he understands about the world. That meant
Mhm.
he was cut off from his family, from his
Mhm.
friends, from a future business that he was going to inherit that would have meant a very easy economic life. And instead, he decided that his own honesty was more important than all of that. And it really it really, you know, tugs on my heartstrings that people are put in these positions where like if they're gonna be honest about what they think about the world, it means they're gonna lose all of these aspects of their life that are so important um, for our just development as individuals, like, you know, all of our social connections, and the fact that uh, we live in this, you know, market economy where you do have to have some kind of like sustenance. And he had a situation, like kind of a sweet situation he was going to fall
Mhm.
into. And instead he decided to give that up for a much less certain path in life.
Mhm.
I don't know. It was just, it was a really powerful story. And uh, yeah, I definitely, I shared that on my Facebook because I'm connected to a lot of, I'm not a particularly religious person. I find a lot of beauty in a lot of religious traditions. I still have you know, a number of positive feelings about the tradition that I was raised in, but I don't take those things literally, and yeah, I'm definitely a more skeptical person with regard to those issues, but I wanted to share that story because I felt like I'm connected with so many people who some version of that guy's story is playing out inside of themselves.
Mhm.
And it's just a terrible thing that we have this struggle between honesty and reality, and also um, the narratives that people have, you know, emotional attachments to.
Mhm.
And if you're, you know, there's a version of honesty that's counterproductive where
Yeah,
you can
absolutely.
be brutal to people and you're probably hurting them and not changing their life for the better. Or or
Mhm.
there's like total politeness where you're not helping those people that way either.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, okay, well, you have all these like unjustified beliefs about the, you know, you think the earth is 6,000 years old, or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And, you know, there's real consequences to holding like uh, really wrong beliefs about the world. I think it is important that we try to be um, at least somewhat accurate, right? Like there's consequences to being wrong about things, and so it's important. Um, so yeah, I don't, it's something that I definitely struggle with, is like what's the productive way to address people's religious biases, and like are the biases really that bad in a given situation? And sometimes they definitely are. And you know, I think a lot of I mentioned like the problem with spanking earlier in our society, like that's I think that has like a relationship with religion. A lot of people will cite the Bible or, you know, religious type beliefs whenever justifying, you know, what is essentially child abuse. and it's really hard to break through on that level to try to get people to understand. Like, I don't know, I think it ends up coming back to that sort of like network of approaches where like
Mm.
maybe you're not going to be able to challenge them, they're going to use their religious beliefs to justify that, and maybe you can get them to care a little bit about the psychological evidence
Mm.
instead of directly challenging their faith or whatnot. I don't know. um and there was another thing I wanted to bring up, and I've lost it by
Okay.
rambling too much.
Was it about free will or religion or?
Yeah, it was about religion. It was something else that you had said that I'll just let it go. If it's important, it'll come back.
Right. I think it's very interesting how, I mean, you're in the United States and I'm in Sweden, and these countries have a very, very kind of opposite um, development when it comes to religion. You've been a secular country for a long time, secular in terms of constitutionally secular. There's a harsh divide between church and state in the United States,
Hmm.
but you're also a very religious country, and we're the opposite, where we had a state church up until somewhere in the 80s, and it only, the state church basically got abolished because it was starting to feel obsolete, because everyone was getting, well, was atheist anyways, or people weren't that religious anymore. um, so I feel that in Sweden there was never this kind of atheist movement rebelling against religion in any way. It just sort of became atheist through through a kind of cultural development and
Hmm.
interest in modernity and things like that. And in the United States, it's more. It seems you have more of a kind of debate.
Right.
There's debates about God. There's an atheist community. Being an atheist is a thing you can be in the United States. Um, and here it didn't happen that way. I don't know what my point is there, but it's an interesting difference, and I think it really makes a big difference for what it means to be an atheist in the United States and in Sweden. Like in Sweden, being an atheist is like, I'm talking about it because I'm talking to you basically, but it's not a thing that Swedish people are, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, it doesn't
Uh,
need to be said.
yeah, and there's no, yeah, it's not like part of your identity construction. It's just a kind of, for most people, it's just kind of not there, right?
Yeah, I was listening to a video. I'm trying to remember her name. I think her name is Rebecca Watson.
Mm,
She's a YouTube skeptic that covers science issues and kind of current events and stuff like that. I really like her channel. And she was talking about this recent study that came out that um, I guess more and more Americans are getting turned off uh,
mm,
about religion, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have this rise of this sort of like white evangelical fundamentalism in the country. That is kind of moving alongside the sort of right-wing populist politics with Trump and all
mm,
this stuff. And this is having a backlash effect where a lot of people are saying, I don't want to be a part of that.
mm,
And she was speculating that maybe there's a relationship as to why, you know, uh, I don't know the exact numbers, but my impression is that like a lot of Europe is a lot more secular than we are.
mm,
And, particularly like Sweden and Denmark,
mm,
uh, and she was speculating that um, maybe some of that was due to the fact that there was this like imposition of religion for a period of time, and the natural response to that is to kind of move away from it. Whereas like we have like this more to us, freedom of religion and the First Amendment, and these things are all like very important to our political and cultural identity. And so maybe we have this like this alternative path of development where we indulge more in those things because they're not, imposed by the state. Rather, they're kind of more community identity and stuff like that. So I don't know if there's anything to that, but I do find it really fascinating that
Yeah.
that certain demographics are getting like more intensely religious, and that's like pushing other people away from them.
Mm.
And so I
Yeah,
don't know.
it is. So much is just about politics and how people feel and identity.
Yeah, so much of it comes down to feelings and identity. It's true.
Mm.
It's um yeah. I feel like we
I was thinking about one thing that's kind of, if we go back to free will, um, which is if there are bad arguments against free will. And one of the arguments that I have argued is bad in one of our groups is this argument where you measure brainwaves and you come to the conclusion that decisions are made before we experience them.
Mhm.
And I've had a little trouble getting this across in these groups, or maybe people just disagree with me, but the way we define free will in the skeptic community or whatever is often like the ability to have done otherwise. And sometimes you add in a way that was up to you. Okay, so then we have two components of this. You have the ability to have done otherwise, which kind of contra-causal magical ability.
Mm.
And on the other hand, you have whatever you mean by you, which is basically a matter of identity at this point. So it seems to me that if you have the ability to have done otherwise, I don't see why experiencing that with a delay takes the ability away. If the brain can do it, I mean, I don't think the brain can do it. We have all these other arguments why it's nonsense. But let's assume it is there. Let's assume there is like a part of our brain that has this ability to have done otherwise, that is responsible for constructing a free will component of our decision making. Well, then we have that ability, and I don't identify in a way where a delayed experience would undermine that, really. So that's one argument that I wish would be used less.
I think it's interesting supplemental information, the neuroscience side of things. But yeah, I think a lot of people have moved away from putting those types of arguments like up front because they don't seem to be all that effective. It does seem to matter to me personally. Like I find it interesting that like if it is the case that my decisions are made subconsciously, and then my conscious experience isn't of making the decision, but instead it's the experience of understanding what decision has already been made.
Yeah.
To me, that's very fascinating, and it's helpful for me to like process the subjective side of things. Like, well, if I don't have free will, then what is the sensation that I identify with free will? And it's like a different way of understanding that kind of first person sensation.
Yes.
But yeah, I agree with you And I used to be a big fan of that sort of argumentation. And yeah, I agree. Excuse me. I agree with you that I don't think it's the most effective argument, and it can actually get you into some trouble because there are people that talk about the concept. I don't know if you've heard the concept of free won't. It's like,
Yes, yes, absolutely.
yeah, the
Mm,
ability to like to consciously cancel an
mm,
impulse, and therefore that's like a type of free will.
yes.
And that all depends on like the sort of like frontal activity in your brain that is more associated with consciousness. And so yeah, I can definitely see how like when you get into like the neuroscience side of things, if you're not like really on your game, things can get muddy and someone else can make an argument that sounds like equally plausible or more plausible. um but but yeah, I don't know, personally I like that kind of information, but yeah, I've
Yeah,
become less reliant on it as like a point of like, well, this is the science, and so therefore you must accept it. Like,
I like the information a lot.
yeah.
I just don't feel that it's any kind of kill shot for free will, like it's sometimes presented that way. And I also think that it's a little bit. I mean, there's probably some reason why we experience things. There is some kind of reciprocity between the conscious experience and the decision making for complex decisions. Even if the experience is delayed, there is still some kind of back and forth. There's some reason why these decisions need to be experienced, why it's efficient for the brain to kind of send those decisions into our consciousness. There's a reason for that, right? So
It certainly seems like it's part of like the chain of causality that like
yes,
it passes through your consciousness.
yes, and I find it very unlikely that consciousness is irrelevant to decision making. I don't think consciousness makes decisions. I don't think I don't think agency resides in consciousness, but I think that there's reasons why we experience things. Probably because it's more efficient to do things in the form of experiences, whatever that is, learning, reward systems. Yeah, like we evolved this for a reason, right?
Hmm.
So just because you can point to some de- delay in time for the cognitive process coming into experience, I don't see whatever role consciousness has with regards to these decisions. It still has that role, and I don't. Yeah, it just doesn't seem like a very well thought through argument against free will to me. Or it seems that if you think that it's the kill shot for free will, that's because you have um, other baggage where you identify, as it were, incorrectly with your experiences, and and then maybe it's you that has other things to clarify uh, you know rather than free will.
Yeah, it might be another one of those instances where you're conflating your own journey with the actual like
Right,
logical discussion.
right,
Like I can
exactly. You,
remember,
you might.
oh, I was gonna say I can remember learning about like Lebet and like the experiments that came after that. And personally that meant a lot to me in the moment.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, that's not necessarily like that was my journey. That's not necessarily the actual like logical set that we're dealing with.
yeah, I think that that's the role it plays. It undermines your intuition and helps you get further. It kind of shakes you to hear that information, right? which is good. But
I have a so I have like this half-formed thought about consciousness, and it's something that I've thought for a long time, and I'm basically just waiting for someone smarter than me to explain it to myself. Because I notice that's kind of how things work, is a lot of times I'll have like half of a thought and I'll hear someone else's explanation and I'll be like, oh, that kind of fills in the gaps. I think that's like the thought that I'm gonna have for now, until a better one comes along. Uh, but to me, and this is after having like taken a little bit of linguistics in college. Like I was a anthropology major, and part of that was taking a course in linguistics and uh, diving down a little bit into what language means and how language works, and like the differences between societies with written language, societies without written language, and uh, just all of these interesting differences in the way humans think and process. And to me, I think eventually we're going to come to some sort of understanding that language is like this giant chunk of what we mean when we're talking about consciousness. I think
mm,
so much of it is just the fact that we're a nervous system and we use language. And I don't know if that explains everything, but I think
mm,
that explains like most of it. It's Language is such a powerful thing. It forms all of our thoughts, like it organizes our thoughts. It's
mm.
uh I mean, it's very hard to think without language. Arguably, that's like maybe the point of meditation, is to try to calm down the sort of linguistic oriented processes that are going on in your head. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think so much of our conscious experience has to do with language. And I mean, you see that even with the way different cultures, different language speakers will process the same event, but they process it through their linguistic filter, and
Mm,
they'll come up with like different conclusions. Like, for example, if if you're speaking a gendered language and you're talking about an object that is categorized as masculine in your culture, you'll tend
mm.
to also put masculine attributes to that object. Whereas,
Right.
like someone who speaks a language that is gendered and considers the same object feminine, the example I've come across is a bridge. Like in a language where a bridge is a masculine thing, it's thought of as like big and strong, and all
Mm,
these sort of stereotypical things we think about men. And if it's a language that considers bridges to be feminine, well, they'll think of the bridge as like elegant and very beautiful, or
mm.
whatever stereotypical thoughts we associate with femininity. And it's
Mm.
just language is just so deep in who we
Right.
are. And I think a big part of what we mean when we're talking about consciousness is just like the sort of operating system of language, like
Mhm.
interacting with our nervous system.
Right. That's an interesting perspective. I really disagree with it, uh,
Okay, interesting.
which is interesting that this is a point where we would disagree, but it might also have to do with um, what are you referring to when you say consciousness?
Right.
Um, and but for me, that seems to be kind of mistaking the jam for the jar or something like that.
Okay.
Um, uh, because when I refer to consciousness, I refer to the the seeming itself, the capacity to have an experience. Basically, I would say if there is something that it is like to be a rock, then the rock is conscious. It doesn't matter what it is like to be the rock. It's conscious if there is something that it is like to be the rock. Doesn't presume thoughts or sensory experience or any specific experience. It just presumes the experiencing of being a rock is happening I don't believe that's the case. I think rocks are
Okay.
not conscious, but it's an example that kind of clarifies what do I mean when I say consciousness. And language seems to me is a human thing mostly, uh, or some large primates have you can argue that lots of animals have languages,
That
right?
gets that gets fuzzy as well.
Yes, but I wouldn't, if I look into the eyes of a mouse, which I don't think have a very complex language, I don't intuitively feel the mouse is less conscious than me.
Hmm.
I might think of it as having much less complex experiences in a lot of ways.
I agree.
But I wouldn't intuitively say the mouse is less conscious than me. That doesn't make any sense to me. Um, so
Yeah.
when
I,
I talk about consciousness, I would more, I'm not sure that it makes sense to talk about degrees of consciousness. But if I would talk about degrees of consciousness, I would be referring to uh, some transition from the transition from awake to asleep, like the transition from fully awake to dreamless sleep, something like that would be the scale of consciousness, of how conscious you are. I'm not sure that makes sense because the way I see it, falling asleep is just one of the experiences that you can have. I don't think you are less conscious at any point while falling asleep. It's not how I look at it, but um, but you don't have thoughts and memories of that process. So
so,
it's not gonna. So it's gonna be. You're not gonna be able to talk about it. Um, but
right.
but I don't. No, I don't mean that consciousness is necessarily a jar that can contain anything. But but at least intuitively, I don't see that it is that it directly corresponds to the complexity of experience or capacities of the brain or language or anything like that. I would talk about that as a different topic myself.
So so I agree with the vast majority of what you said there.
Mm.
And so maybe we can call this like we can split these into like consciousness one and consciousness two. So
Sure.
I'm gonna say what you're talking about is consciousness
Yeah.
one, and I associate that with some type of nervous system or
Mm.
like a proto nervous system, something like that. That I think like the sort of experience of awareness or you know, some sort of what it's like to be something, I
Mm.
think is more or less like what it's like to have some level of nervous system operating.
Mm.
And then I agree, I wouldn't rank these as like more or less. And I definitely would use like the framing of complexity. Um, and so consciousness two would be what a lot of people mean when they associate consciousness as some sort of human quality. And
Mm.
I agree with you about the language thing as well, is that like you can talk about different types of species having language, uh, again, I think it like comes to like a question of complexity.
Mm.
um, I think the idea of written language is really significant, that we're like externalizing symbology and like creating like really complicated, complex. I mean, like, uh, you know, computer coding is essentially a form of language, and that's the complexity that allows for like this interaction, which
Yeah.
is like mind blowing, right? Like I can't actually conceive of what's going on here that allows us to talk, but apparently it's happening.
Yes.
Uh,
It's
but
amazing.
yeah, but
It is amazing that we can talk to each other.
yeah, yeah, it's really fascinating to me. So yeah, my use of consciousness, at least as far as like as it relates to language, is to talk about some kind of more humanish experience, not necessarily human, but
Yeah.
the sort of level of complexity that allows for like exchanges over the internet and stuff like this.
Sure, sure.
And I don't see it as any type of like magical, the dualistic process that happens like on top of the brain, or like a ghost in the
Mm,
machine or something like that. To me, the reason why I like to suggest that so much of that like type 2 sort of consciousness is linguistic is because I think if one like digs into that, um, I think it really does demystify
mm,
um, the type of consciousness that we think kind of makes us separate from the rest of the animal kingdom. And
right.
instead, I think it gives a very practical explanation for why it is that we experience like not necessarily a higher level of consciousness, but a higher level of complexity. I like the way you put that.
Yes,
Because I, I,
I would agree with that. I just think my disagreement is when this way of thinking uh, um, leads you down a path to search for the explanation for consciousness in language, for example.
mhm,
I think that's a mistake. I don't think it's a mistake to search for the nature of humanness in language, for example. That's probably a good project, but I don't think you're gonna find um, why are we conscious in language in that kind of, yeah, I think so. It's yeah. I
well,
need to start rounding up here because
okay,
my boyfriend
okay,
is waiting for
yeah.
me. But
Um, just to try to be real short, yeah, I agree. I think that's more of like, I think what you're talking about is more of like a type 1 project, and probably
yes,
is more like biological in nature. And
yeah,
yeah, I just, the reason why I bring up language is because I think so many people are like mystified by like the type 2 experience.
mm,
And so that's like my interest in exploring that type of experience and trying to relate that quality to language. But anyways,
right.
um uh
I can say one more thing is that
yeah,
I think this is another topic where meditation is gonna change your intuitions a little bit, because my intuition now is that, as I said, I'm not sure degrees of consciousness is something that makes sense, but if it does, my intuition is that I'm more conscious the less I think,
that's fascinating.
and
I
that would be a little bit hard to square with the idea of um, language and complexity being having a core central role in the understanding of consciousness.
I think that actually makes perfect sense if you're defining consciousness by like the type 1 quality.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Then like your thought there, I think it's perfectly coherent.
Mm.
Um, but anyways, Luva, I
Yes,
appreciate your time so much. This has been the most fascinating conversation I've had in some time, and
right.
I'm just so grateful for it. Is there anything that we've left out that you wanna hit on the way out, or is there anything you'd like to promote?
No, I think I'm very happy. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think
Awesome.
we've covered a lot of things. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, this is probably going to be the last conversation on my channel of this nature for at
Mm.
least some time. I don't know how long it's going to be before I schedule another one of these. I have like some other projects in mind that I might be doing on here, but I'm still working on that stuff. Um, so yeah, there's also for anyone still watching, there's also I think like 17 plus hours of other interviews of this sort. So yeah, please check out the other conversations I've had. And just once again, man, thank you so much for your time. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
All right.
All right, everyone have a beautiful day.
Yeah. Bye bye.